Hi, I'm Greedy Collane in the CapeCod.com News Center, and welcome to Sunday Journal. I'm joined today by a special guest from Studio G Architects who is involved in a local infrastructure project for Wellfleet. Do you mind introducing yourself for our listeners?
Hi, I'm Gail Sullivan, and I'm the founder and managing principal of Studio G Architects.
All right, awesome. It's a pleasure to talk with you today. It's great to have you on video as well. You guys are going to be working on Maurice's Campground, which is an ongoing project for the community for quite some time now. It's exciting that you guys are going to be involved in this. Can you tell us a little bit more about your organization, maybe some examples of work you'd like to highlight for our listeners?
Sure. So we've been around for 31 years. We're a women-owned architecture and planning firm, Boston-based, but I'm a part-time Wellfleet resident, so we're now partly Wellfleet-based as well, which was part of my interest, actually, in doing Maurice's Campground. Our history is in doing affordable housing, also shelters and supportive housing. We can get into more about that later if you want. And then as well, education and civic projects. So really for us, the core is things that make people's lives better. They contribute to building community. That's why our tagline is building sustainable communities. And we do everything from early learning centers to higher education.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff. I actually wasn't aware of how many different things you guys have specialized in over the years. Now, as well, I do have a bit of a leading question here because I already know. But so have you guys that worked in affordable housing before, and specifically, have you worked in the community of Wellfleet? So can you just elaborate more on previous projects there?
Sure. So we have done affordable housing. We do high performance, meaning very sustainable affordable housing. And we have been working with POA, Preservation of Affordable Housing, and CDP, which is local to the Lower Cape, the Community Development Partners, on the Lawrence Hill project. And this is the affordable housing that the town of Wellfleet probably started planning for about 4 years ago. It's been a long process. They did a remarkable job, I'll say, in building support in the community for affordable housing. It seems to me that people recognize how very badly affordable housing is needed for people who work for the town, people who work in the businesses in the town and in surrounding towns. So there was a lot of support, which made it a great project to work on. And just to give a little detail on that project, it's 46 units. They will all be affordable units. And we've designed it with a range of ages in mind. So we know that there is a high need for families, right? So younger families who are going to be the core of the workforce in Wellfleet need housing. So there are 2 and 3 bedroom family units. But we also know that there's an aging population, and some people may want to downsize, and they may need to be in a place that has an elevator, for instance, as they age in place. And so there's a building that's 3 stories with an elevator with 1 and 2 bedroom units, as well as townhouses for families. So it feels to us like a really nice mix to respond to the needs that we heard from people in Wellfleet.
Wow, this is very involved. You guys have clearly done a lot of research on this. I was actually unaware that you were a local yourself, actually. So you're very plugged in, I'm sure, in the affordable housing crisis, grouping the entire Cape as of late. But I'm an Outer Cape resident myself. I'm East Am born, and so we recently had consolidation with ambulances. Even first responders have been a concern. So it's definitely very interesting to see that you guys are keen and keeping a finger on the pulse of that. So as well, you mentioned sustainable practices involved in this. Is this going to be involving like renewable tech as well as some other possibilities? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's a couple of things. People may or may not have heard of Passive House. So Passive House is a standard that was started in Europe for very, very airtight and watertight buildings. And the point of this is to make it possible to reduce the mechanical systems for heating and cooling to the smallest possible systems. And then the envelope, our roof, our walls, our foundation, are super insulated with great windows and doors. By designing that way and avoiding any draft is what most of us experience inside the house, right? And avoiding any heat being lost to the outdoors, you make a very tight envelope. And this is what Passive House standards are for. So the Lawrence Hill project is designed to meet Passive House certification. which is a commitment that POA has made on its part for all of its projects, and it's a commitment that Studio G has made as well to our projects. It adds a little bit of extra money. It saves people in their energy costs, right? If you're a homeowner, if you're a tenant, you're going to pay less for your energy costs. And one of the great things about it, Grady, is we do all electric heating, ventilation, and cooling. So this is affordable housing that will be heated in the winter, cooled in the summer, and have continuous ventilation. People will pay very, very little, if anything, for their utility costs because we're putting photovoltaic panels on the roofs. And so that's our renewable tech. The great news is there are tax credits for putting renewable energy on your roof, and this project will take advantage of those. So when it's built and ready to be occupied, there will be PVs on every roof in the development.
Wow, that is awesome. I mean, it's great that you're kind of preparing for that, the green future that we've been trying to work towards for the past, feels like 3 decades, but we're getting there a little bit more and more every year, it seems. So that's positive. Offshore wind, who knows where that is going to be in terms of the Cape's personal power needs. You also mentioned in the statement about plans for Maurice's Campground wanting to make it a more lively area in general. How do you make a community more lively? Do you mean like green space, mixing potential uses? What are some examples?
Yes and yes. So I think there's a few things. We need to work. There are some kind of development principles that the Maurice's Campground Planning Committee has already established. And I think one of our early things we just have started. We had our last meeting last week, and I actually just got back today from having done a site visit yesterday with one of the members of the planning committee and several members of the design team, really walking through the campground, looking very carefully at the infrastructure, at the natural ecology of the place, and trying to get a feel for what makes sense. And if many of your listeners and readers will know, it's Maurice's Campground is right across from the Wellfleet Cinema and Drive-In, a great landmark for many of us. And it bounds both Route 6 on one side and the Cape Cod Rail Trail on the other side. So those are two really distinct edges, if you will. The other two sides are both residential neighborhoods. So it's really important for us to think about all those edges, because whatever gets developed on this site is going to touch all of them, right? So how is it going to relate to the bike trail? How is it going to relate to Route 6? How is it going to relate? And I think that's mostly going to be landscape buffer. How is it going to relate to its residential neighbors? So those are all important considerations. And I think our vision and what the planning committee has articulated is wanting both to create a community on the site. It's 22 acres. It's quite large for a town like Wellfleet. And of course, you're Eastham born. We're right on the border of Eastham there. They'll be getting their water supply from Eastham. So you sit there in this really important location in an area in desperate need of housing, but not only in desperate need of housing. Everything I've been hearing in town, the shell fishermen, all of the folks who do fishing, folks in the construction trades, the folks who do landscaping, you know, the people who keep an economy going, who keep all of these towns that we love going. They need not just shelter, they need more than shelter. They need a place for their children to play. So a lively place is a place where we welcome kids, right, to some outdoor space where they can play, do what I did, you know, run like hellions through a neighborhood and do whatever we wanted to all day long until we were called in for supper. Children need that kind of play. And so you need space for kids to play. We want to accommodate, of course, bike as well as vehicular traffic, given the connection to the bike trail that Maurice's Campground has already established. And then you may want more than just the housing. So currently there's the store on the face of the campground facing Route 6. It wasn't open last season, but hopefully will open this season, I hear. Yeah, we'll see. But it's very important to think about what are people's needs. If we add a lot of new households in that area, right on the boundary of Eastham and Wellfleet, what do those folks need? Should there be a place to buy groceries? Should there be a place to get a cup of coffee, or in my case, tea? So you want to think about what supports more than just shelter, right? What really makes a community. So we'll look at that. And I mentioned some of the folks in the physical trades and making their living from the sea, because I know this. I know several folks who have grants for oyster farming. They have a lot of equipment, and that equipment needs to be stored somewhere. And there are not sufficient places. So we all love that we have this really robust industry of shellfish farming and shellfish fishing, but where's the support for their industry? And might this campground, this is one of the questions the planning committee has asked, might this campground be a place where we can provide some of that support, as simple as storage, or, maybe there's a place to sell the food that you've just harvested, or any of a dozen other things that smarter people than me who do this work in town will be able to add. So what we're going to be doing is starting with a bunch of focus groups. Our team will lead some of them. And then we're going to be asking the people who go through those focus groups to lead focus groups among their own social networks, their work networks, their friend networks. And in that way, we can get the broadest number of voices into this conversation. So the big questions, what do we most need here? What's going to make this a great community for you for the next 100 years, right? Not looking backwards, but very much looking forwards. How do we make this a great and vibrant place where the people who work here can live here, and where the people who live here can appreciate and support all that is available? Mm-hmm. So it's big questions, right? It's lofty questions. And then there's going to be some very, very prosaic questions like, what kind of septic system do we need to have to support all of those activities? Because we don't have town sewer, right? And the water piece, thanks to Eastham, has gotten solved, but the septic is a very big issue. It's very possible that septic will be the limiter on what development can occur. And then there's some other things that are exciting from the ecology of the site. So it's adjacent to a small cranberry bog and to a small stream. I believe it's Springbrook. Yeah, Springbrook is immediately adjacent to the campground. And so we have to protect that and perhaps enhance that, but certainly protect it. So there's a lot of interesting things to consider.
Yeah, it sounds like you have your work cut out for you guys. I don't envy, but it is also very interesting. It sounds like that you can also gather a lot of data that would be useful even into future projects and can be used for the rest of Wellfleet as well. Between a potential oyster sales stand right across the street from the movies, that would be where I grew up, essentially in that theater, you have me sold, is all I'm going to say now. That was my dream scenario is what you're creating. But that is awesome. A lot of cool things going on. And also, it seems like there's a lot more of a change in development when it comes to maybe 30, 40, 50, well, actually even more like 60 or 70 years ago, what kind of things we want on Cape Cod. It seems like there's a lot more community. It's more receptive to like more mixing uses for stuff and wanting to have that more walkable environment. That's not necessarily what this is. But even with Eastham, they wanted to have that walkable town center. They recently acquired some property to make that happen. Nothing's been installed quite yet, but it seems like there's definitely a change in the way the conversation goes. Would you agree, or do you think you have anything you want to add in there too?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think for a long time, people thought it was sufficient just to have single family homes, right? And single family homes are great, but that doesn't make a community. What makes a community is the ability of people to come together, whether that's walking down the road, people walk their dogs. Everybody in Wellfleet has a dog. People walk their dogs, right? They get to know each other. One of my good friends has gotten to know most of our neighbors because she walks her dog multiple times a day, and that's how she meets people. So that's a way of making community, coming together at a cafe or a shared workplace of any kind. Maybe that's a shared workshop for some of the folks who are doing fishing industries. I think there are limitless ideas really for the ways that people can come together. The cinema is one way we come together. So we try to bring these things together. And I think you're right, Grady, that there's so much more consciousness now than even maybe 10 or 15 years ago about the need to make sure that, especially in these lower Cape towns, that we're supporting the workforce, right? So that it, we don't want these towns to die. They're beautiful, they're precious places. And you have to have an economy, right? And it has to be self-sustaining in order to have a vibrant place to live. And we all want to live in a vibrant place, right? And I think one of the things that's really exciting about what's going on in the Cape, so I live the rest of the time in Boston and Jamaica Plain. And what I see that's similar between the urban and the ex-urban, or really kind of pastoral communities we're talking about, is that people do want to have a mix of uses. They want amenities, they want the resources, they want to be able to have a sustaining job, they want to be able to raise their families in a community that supports them. And so those are principles that I think cross all the boundaries of geography and other boundaries, let's say, the cultural and ethnic and race boundaries. We all want those things. We want safe, livable communities. And Maurice's Campground feels like a really exciting starting point to, or not even the starting point, but one point along the way of ensuring that kind of future in Wellfleet and adjacent towns.
It's very interesting. Between, of course, Provincetown is like always, it's full every summer. It is a huge cultural draw as well as economic draw. But there's all kinds of towns that are along the entire Outer Cape that are all wonderful and beautiful. Of course, the best one is Eastham. I'm not biased at all. But with the National Seashore, there's all kinds of wonderful things out there. But I always did feel like I was like, is there maybe a missed opportunity? Like, it doesn't really feel like it needs to be so quiet completely year round, especially with so many interesting things. Now, Eastham with that town center. Excuse me, as well. So actually, it's wonderful that you're also in Boston, because I can ask you questions about like there's the Pine Hills, which is just off Cape, and that's more of that mixed use, lots of townhouses and stuff like that. I was just speaking with Barnstable County Commissioner Mark Forrest just the other day, and we were talking about how there was like a gold rush essentially on Cape Cod back in the 70s, 80s, 90s of just like, let's just put in so many developments that buy up and then single family homes everywhere. But it really, maybe if we had more things like the Pine Hills, that would be another example. But it sounds like you're kind of like doing like a mini version of that. That seems a lot more culturally relevant to Wellfleet as well. So it's very interesting to see the changes going on.
Great. Yeah, I agree. And I think that one of the things that makes the Outer Cape so very important is the cultural scene, right? The arts, all the arts that have been supported. And so I didn't even mention it, but there's another possibility for what could happen on site. We have many galleries, as you know, in Wellfleet. But how do you support the arts? And especially, how do you support the arts year round? Because the artist's work might be seen, for 3 months of the summer, but what about for the rest of the year? They're still producing art. They'd still like to be able to show it, presumably. How do you do that? So I think really thinking about supporting the year-round activity, not in a way that overwhelms, right? Oyster Fest, for instance, can be a little overwhelming, although I love it. But
one of my
in a
favorite
way that
events,
really
but
just, what's that?
oh, I'm sorry. One of my favorite events, but yeah, multiple weekends, I would probably be quite sick afterwards, just because of how busy it can be. But my apologies. Didn't mean to interrupt. Please continue.
No, ditto, exactly my thought. I love it. It's once a year. It's crazy busy. It's really a fun party. But do you want that every Saturday in Wellfleet? Absolutely not. So, how do you make the kind of gatherings something that's not maybe always so big, but still possible, and support everybody, the craftspeople, the artists. There's so many creative people on the Cape. And I don't think we, except for in a couple of places, obviously Provincetown's full of galleries, Wellfleet is full of galleries, but there isn't a lot of year-round support. It is kind of dead in the winter. I'm in Wellfleet all year round on weekends, but it's a little bit quiet.
It is what it is. Eastham, it was like, all right, it's late November, time to hibernate, I guess. See you in April. But it is interesting.
Right.
It's great to see some of that kind of changing as well. I know the Arts Foundation of Cape Cod, Julie Wake is big involved in some of the arts and trying to get that year-round support. So it's very interesting. We're about coming up on time, but I wanted to ask a little bit more about like the timeline of some things. I know you're probably just in like the earliest stages, so I'm not going to ask you for a date to stick to it. But I know we have construction starting this summer is commencing for the Lawrence Hill project. I assume we're a bit far out for stuff for Maurice's campground. I guess what are the next steps for you guys? Just more of those outreach meetings? You're going to be drafting plans behind the scenes? What's going on?
Yes. Yeah, thanks for asking about that. So we are just started, and this is anticipated to be about a 10 to 12 month planning study. And I should, very important, note that it's not just Studio G Architects. We have partners. J.M. Goldson is doing our community engagement. Langen is doing our landscape and civil engineering, and Boston Communities will be doing the financial feasibility, because it really takes all these different expertises to pull together the kind of study that we're doing. So there'll be, yes, a lot of community engagement that'll be ongoing. There are going to be 3 over the next 10 months, 3 larger public meetings. We're very excited. We're hoping to do a design charrette on the campground property with as many people from the public as want to show up. I have no date, no details, but we are in the planning on that. And that'll be one great place to start to gather a lot of ideas and also share some potential ideas. And we'll keep doing that in a variety of ways. So it'll be on the Wellfleet website. We're going to be doing surveys as well as the focus groups, and then regular reporting back to the planning committee of the progress. And yes, the funnest part for me, besides talking to people, is doing the design ideas and getting people's reaction to that. So we'll do a lot of that. Ultimately, it'll all be put into a report that will be shared with the Wellfleet Select Board. And then if and when they approve a plan, and we don't know exactly what that plan will be right now, then they'll plan to put out an RFP to developers. So a request for proposals, asking people who can do this development to give proposals. And what's unknown at this point is whether that would be a single development RFP for the entire site, or perhaps the planning committee, excuse me, perhaps the planning committee will decide that they want to do separate RFPs over a period of time. I mean, this is potentially sizable. And so I think there's a lot to be thought through about what the town wants, about what's an appropriate time frame, how much do you do at one time. These are all, I think, really critical concerns for the community around there. And none of it has been decided yet. So those are all things that the committee will start to make decisions on as we move forward. But ultimately, I wouldn't expect any development to be happening on the campground, well, for at least 6 years, I think, because the folks who live on the campground right now, who have, 8-9 month residency right now, they have a right to stay there. It's for another 5 to 6 years. I don't know exactly when the date started, but so they will continue to live there. And they are, of course, an important constituency that we will be talking to as well.
All right, awesome. Thank you for the update. We'll stay tuned as well for people who are interested in learning more from Studio G Architects and a bit more about this process. We'll have links in the description for this, for this interview as well. But thank you so much, Gail. It's been a pleasure to speak with you about this. Any closing comments you wanted to have our listeners know about while I still have you?
No. This was a lot of fun, and I hope people participate in the process.
All right, awesome. Thank you again. It has been a pleasure.
Thanks a lot, Grady.
I'm Grady Collane in the CapeCod.com News Center, and thank you for listening.